Today is week 2 of a series I'm just simply calling Healthy. And if you were here last week, I kicked this off just telling you, I'm not really one of those people that's like, God gave me a word for this year. It's not like every year I have a specific word. And I know lots of people that are that way. Maybe I'm just not there yet. But a few months ago, I felt like this just kept coming up. It was like that kind of thing where everything I read about, everything I listened to, every conversation I had with somebody, it seemed to go back to this thought of health. And so I want to spend a few months just trying to dive into what it looks like to be healthy. When I say healthy, I mean spiritually healthy. I really don't have much authority to tell you about how to be physically healthy. I kind of talked about a little bit of that last week. But if you're not spiritually healthy, you're not healthy. That's the way that things are. That is the truth. And I've been using this definition. This is the definition of health that I want to rally around. Here it is. How closely your life and practices line up with God and God's laws. And if you were here last week, kind of the recap is just that I wanted you to decide that God's word is the authority for health in your life. Not this person you listen to on TikTok or this thing or whatever, but the word of God, the source of what everybody else is riffing off of, is the authority in your life. And not just, oh, that sounds nice, this is a good alternative, or this is a good thought, but take it as the truth that it is. And I gave you a terrible example, but it'd be the same thing as me, saying to you, hey, I think I could probably, jump from here to there and just bounce on the air. We know that that's not going to happen. And the same way that law of gravity says it ain't going to happen, God's word, God's ways, God's laws are the same way. And once you decide that you are going to do that, it opens up a whole new world to you. I'm going to read this passage in 2 Corinthians 12, if you want to turn there. But just to set this up, there is the whole book of 2 Corinthians really. It's kind of Paul, the Apostle Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament, as we've talked about endlessly, going through and rebuttaling or going kind of replying to a lot of his haters. Let me just say it that way. So picture this. Paul starts the church in Corinth, Corinthian church, right? 1st and 2nd Corinthians, that's what he's speaking to. That church, the church of Corinth. He's given his life to that. And then he hears word that some people have showed up to this church that he's built, that he started, that he's put his blood, sweat, and tears into, and said that he's not the real thing. That they've done their best to discredit all the work that he's done. And so in chapter 11, he kind of lays into all the suffering that he went through to get to this point. And Paul had a few things going on that were very unique to him. If you stick with me, I need to set this up for you before we read it. But the Apostle Paul had visions. Anybody ever had a vision? I've never had a vision. I've had dreams, and usually they're really weird. It's like you're racing go-karts with your shop teacher from 8th grade. You never went to shop, and the go-kart is made out of spaghetti. Like weird. My dreams are not good dreams. They're weird. It's like, that was not useful. But there are some of you that have had some visions where, God has showed you something. It's not like you've been out-of-body experience maybe, but you just know that this moment is different and God is revealing something to me. Well, the Apostle Paul had several of these moments, and he's kind of referring to the most incredible one without referring to himself at the same time referring to himself. So it's kind of a weird way that he sets this up for you. And as we read this, I don't want you to get tripped up by how he says that. But in essence, he's responding to these false teachers who have infiltrated the Corinthian church, and they're going against him saying, you're not the real deal, you're not a real apostle, don't follow Paul. Everything Paul taught you, throw it out the window, because they were trying to infiltrate this church and take control. Demonic forces is really what's going on. And so Paul, again, very close to God. If you want to talk about spiritual health, I think Paul has a pretty good report card going on, right? To the extent that he's had visions where Jesus is speaking to him, showing him things. And he speaks about this one specific vision. So I'm going to start it off there. This is in 2 Corinthians 12, and we're going to read 2 through 10. He says this, I know a man who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. He's talking about himself, by the way. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man, still talking about himself, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows. So again, he's saying kind of the same things, was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible things, things that no one is permitted to tell. And this sentence right here reminds me a lot of John's revelation in Revelation. That was a mouthful, but you understand what I'm saying? He talks about the scrolls. There was this scroll, and the angel said, don't write that. He's talking about the same kind of things. Where he has seen heaven, and he wasn't even sure if he was there, or it was just a vision, or what was going on. He's talking about this event that happened that proves his legitimacy. Right? So this is the context of what's being said. I'm setting this up for you. Things that no one is permitted to tell. Verse 5. I will boast about a man like that. He's still talking about himself. But I will not boast about myself except about my weakness. Think about that. Boast about my weakness. What a weird thing to say, isn't it? I will boast about my weakness. It's interesting because in the chapter right before this one, in chapter 11 and verse 30, he says this. It sounds very similar. If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. So that's the picture. Paul is replying to his enemies. And his reply to them is, let me boast about my weaknesses. He starts off and says, I had a vision. It's almost like, when's the last time you talked to Jesus face to face? He's kind of saying, well, I know a man, I know a guy who went to heaven and saw things that I am not allowed to tell you about, but I'm not going to boast about that. Let me boast about my weaknesses. Kind of a strange thing to talk about, isn't it? And Paul, throughout his writing, we see, similar words. And this is strange to us. As you read this, you might think, what does that even mean? What are you talking about? That's odd. I'll go on. He says this in the next verse, back to chapter 12, verse 6. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool because I would be speaking the truth. So he's saying, I can tell you why I have the credentials to be who I am. But I refrain so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say. Then he says this, or because of these surpassingly great revelations. It's almost like, well, the other day I was talking to Jesus, and no, maybe it was the day before that, or maybe it was the revelation before, two before that or something. Because of the surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, which wouldn't be hard to do, if all of a sudden Jesus showed up and started talking to you once a week. If you were drawn up into heaven, or maybe it was a vision. You weren't really, it was to the extent you didn't even know like you were in a trance, or you were there. It didn't matter. It felt the same. If that happened to you on a basis by basis, and you showed up to this church, it would not be hard for you to be like, that preacher needs to shut up. I'm more spiritual than him. I speak in tongues more than ye all. Like this is Paul actually said. But it wouldn't be hard to become conceited if you had that kind of connection to Jesus. It would be pretty easy. And so what he says here is in order for that not to happen, remember again, we're talking about boasting about weaknesses. Stick with that thought. I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I plead with the Lord to take it away. And this word right here, stay on this slide. A thorn, like when we think thorn, we think like every rose has a thorn, like that kind of thing. No. Just trying to get your attention. Thanks for the laugh. No. Think more like a stake you would kill a vampire with. That's what this Greek word means. And again, Paul was not the kind of just complain about things. In chapter 11, if you go back and read it, he gives you kind of this list of all of the persecution that he's gone through. And it's incredible. It's crazy. He says, and I'm just kind of riffing here, that he had been, the cat of 39 tails, I think it is, 40 minus 1 is what they say. It was this punishment designed to take a man to the door of death but not kill him, just to inflict a maximum amount of pain and suffering. So 40 lashes with this thing would kill somebody, but 39, they thought, oh, that's the number. He'd done this like 4 times. The Romans beat him with rods, and we can't picture that. Just scourging, just terrible punishment. He'd been stoned, and not the good kind, like you have to have the card for. The kind that is meant to kill you. Been shipwrecked. He says, I was at sea. I was floating around trying to tread water and survive for a day and a night. Can you imagine? Like, this guy is not the kind to complain about some little, thing, ailment, whatever. But he does time and time kind of boast of the things that have happened. When he talks about the weakness, there's a lot wrapped up in that. Given a thorn in my flesh. And this is a passage, so most of the time when I preach this, I'll say, he was given a thorn in his flesh, and I'll say, well, we don't really know what it was. Our best guess is that he had this ailment with his eyes, because in Galatians, some other place he writes about, I wrote with big letters because, there's clues that would say, maybe he's speaking about that. And I'm not so sure what he's talking about to the kind of accuracy that I would like. But as I've read this and studied some things, the focus on this, a lot of times when we preach through this or think about it, is the sin that we deal with in our lives. I was given a thorn in the flesh. And people will say, what do you think Paul's thorn in the flesh was? Have you ever had a conversation like this? I actually had one yesterday at the music store with somebody else. And the guy was telling me, he said, whatever people say, that's the thing they probably deal with. So it's like, if it's lust, that's their thing. I'm not so sure that that's what the kind of thorn that Paul is talking about in this passage. Because the context of what's going on here is it's boasting of weakness, which is strange. And I'm going to try to tie a bow on that for you here in a minute. But I would say wholeheartedly, I don't know what it was, but I've heard other commentators say things like, well, he tells you right here, I was given a thorn in my flesh, and this is the thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. All the time before I've read this and read a messenger of Satan as some sort of like adjective attached to the thorn in the flesh. There are some people that say that the thorn in the flesh is this thing right here, a demonic voice that is constantly deriding him, the same way these people were doing in chapter 11 and all of 2 Corinthians. In order, what's the point of it? Given a thorn in the flesh, this assumes that God at least allowed this to happen. Track with me with this thought. The devil, the force of evil, whatever you want to say, his whole strategy, the best thing he can do is to make you proud. Why is that? Because pride, and what's the quote? Pride is the pregnant mother of all sin. You've heard this before probably. What's the original sin? I saw Satan fall like light. It was pride. He thought, I'm as good as God is. And this whole passage is speaking to that dynamic. Why would the devil not lean into that? For this to happen means that God at least allowed it, if not said, go do this. And I would speak to you and said, the precedent is Job. Have you read Job lately? How does it start? Remember, God is doing God things and Satan's somewhere in the mix. And he says, have you considered my servant Job? He initiated that contact. Think about that. I was given a thorn in my flesh. And maybe it's this. Maybe it is a messenger of Satan. That's what it says, to torment me. And he did what all of us should do when that happens. Plead with God. Get rid of this thing. Cast it out. Whatever. It's not in him. I'm not saying that. But he pleaded with the Lord to take it away. Whether it was a messenger of Satan, a demonic voice, much like these demonic voices literally in this church that he had built and given his life to. It was kind of his crowning achievement, in essence, that look at this church in Corinth that's doing a very hard thing in tough soil, to say it that way. Given a thorn in my flesh. Why? To keep from becoming conceited. I like the way that the ESV, I've been reading the ESV a lot lately. I might change over to it. I've been an NIV guy. And I told you this a few times, not because I think it's the best translation, but it's just the one that a lot of people from my generation are familiar with. But I want to read the same passage to you in the ESV. Here's what it says. So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, right? So God is communing with Paul on such a level that he could become conceited about it. A thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. And Paul, maybe more than any other New Testament author, writes a lot about this strange dynamic where while we are pursuing God and closeness to him, and we all want to commune on the level that we talk to God and he talks to us, that there is a tendency for when that happens, that there's some negative stuff that can come in with it. And here's the way this looks for us. Here's the way I'd say it to you, saints that have been serving God for a long time. The longer that you serve the Lord, and the better you are at producing fruit, the easier it is to say, man, I'm so good at this. Look at me. I haven't sinned in 20 days. Boy, if everybody could be like me. To keep me from becoming conceited. And Paul was great. There's no denying that. This guy wrote a lot of the New Testament. He started churches. He did all these mighty works. And the Lord gave him some thorn in his flesh. Not sin. I don't think it's sin. That doesn't make sense. Something inside of him, something around him, whether it was a physical ailment or whatever, that just kept him humble about it. If it's a demonic voice, it's like, you're nothing. I can understand that. If it was a physical ailment like his eyes, where it was hard for him to, in his own strength, do what he wanted to do. The point of it was health. And that's strange. It's strange for us, isn't it? Verse 9, move on. Then he said, this is God's reply. Went to him 3 times, but he said, my grace is sufficient for you. And then we read this next part and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. This does not make sense. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Remember, he's talking about boasting about weakness. And this dynamic that Paul is putting before us is so strange. It's not just something that's obvious to the average person, is it? My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness. What a weird thing to say again. In insults and hardships, persecution and difficulties. And then he says this line, that this is not a grammatically correct statement, but it is a theologically correct statement. For when I am weak, then I am strong. What he's saying is that God's grace is strongest in our physical weakness. And so as I read this, as I read a lot of what Paul writes, the question that I ask, as it pertains to what we're talking about, just being healthy, is to be the most spiritually healthy means that we've got to somehow boast about weakness. We've got to somehow be weak in our flesh. And there's this part of me that asks the question, so how do we strategically do this? How do you strategically weaken our flesh? Because the way that we approach this is just something happens that does it for us, and we have to embrace this getting closer to spirituality through it. But what if you could engineer this? and that's not the right word, but it's the best I can come up. What if you could think in terms of how do I not just accept this happening in my life, not just allow it to happen in my life, but double down on it and strategically go after a position of physical weakness. And I'm not talking about try to make yourself sick. Please don't take what I'm saying here and twist it. But lean into this thing of how do I double down on weakening the flesh so that the spirit can be strong. And in my mind, this is a picture of spiritual health. And we don't like this. This is a hard message to preach to you because it's hard to win you over to this idea, I think. Especially if you've not been in it for a while, not experienced it. It's happening in your own life. Here's the dynamic. It's always a battle, and you've heard this before, between spirit and flesh. Always a battle. In Galatians chapter 5, I'm going to spell that out for you. I'm going to read what Paul spells out for you. But this seemed to be a reoccurring theme for Paul, that he always seemed to go back to this position. And I think it was because he was constantly reminded, because of whatever this thorn in the flesh thing was, he was constantly reminded, don't be conceited, that whatever that was caused him to live in that sort of spirit versus flesh battle. And here's what he says. Walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. So if you're looking for strategy on how to double down on what he's talking about, how to weaken the flesh so that the spirit is strong, if you're looking for spiritual health, this is how it works. This is what you should do. Walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit. Again, these two things are at odds. You can allow your spirit to win in this essence, in this situation. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other, to keep you from doing the things you want to do. But, verse 18, if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. What's the law for? You know, some people, they need to be told exactly what to do and when to do it and how to do it, right? You work with some of these people, and the rules were written for them. Can you relate? Like, well, I know not to do that. Any idiot with a brain knows that if you do this, it's not going to work. But then there's some people that those people have caused the rules to be what they are. He's talking about that when you walk by the Spirit, you don't need every little nuanced detail about how to live. But the Spirit is that sort of spiritual intelligence inside of you. Keep from doing things. You're led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. This is the way it is, isn't it? I love the way that he gives us kind of an example of what this looks like in the next verse. And I was searching around, and I love the way the Message puts this list of these bad things. So this is what it looks like when you are not living in the Spirit. This is a terrible sort of list. It's obvious what kind of life develops out of trying to get your own way all the time. And here's the list of what it looks like to be strong in the flesh and weak in the Spirit. This is the dynamic. It's one or the other. There's this battle going on. Repetitive, loveless, cheap sex. Sorry if there's some under 12 people in this room right now. This is we know about that scene. And there are a lot of people that this is just their normal route of life. It was their pursuit before they got married, and hopefully it ended after that. A stinking accumulation of mental and emotional garbage. Ugh. Frenzied and joyless grabs for happiness. There's a whole lot of people that have made their whole existence about trying to be happy. I heard somebody, it's the same guy I was talking to about this thorn in the flesh stuff yesterday. He said, I'm going to get the quote right, I hope. He said, I used to live and do whatever made me happy, and I didn't care about anybody. I couldn't care less about anybody around me. He said, now what makes me happy is making sure that the people around me are cared for, that they're saved, that they're going to heaven, whatever it is. And that's a flip of the script, isn't it? And those are two different things. Because all these things are normal. And there's a lot of voices telling you that this is just what we do. Every healthy red-blooded American should go after repetitive, loveless, cheap sex, why you can do it, right? I don't want to be too graphic here for you, but everyone in the world is looking for this accumulation of everything. That you should go for happiness. Trinket gods, what is that? It's like idols. Anything that you put in the place of God. Magic show religion. I think about smoke machines in church. I'm not going to go there, but we have one somewhere around here we use on occasion. Paranoid loneliness, cutthroat competition, all-consuming yet never satisfied wants, a brutal temper, impotence to love or be loved, divided homes and divided lives, small-minded, lopsided pursuits. Boy, I could put a lot of things in that category. What's the worst thing? That you show up at the throne of God and he talks about your small-minded, lopsided pursuits. I think there's one more verse in there. The vicious habit of, this is reading our mail, man. This just sounds like Facebook in a nutshell. Uncontrolled and uncontrolled addictions. Ugly parodies of community. I could go on. But this is the dynamic. I'm talking about health today. It's strange. It doesn't make sense to us until we see a picture of it. But when you let the flesh get what it wants, it's at the expense of the health of your spirit. I'm going to say that one more time. When you let the flesh do what is default, what it wants, what's normal, what's around you, it is at the expense of your spiritual health. And so here's what this looks like for you. There's some things that seem like, that's not a big deal. It's not that big a deal that I've been watching that show. Picture the battle. I don't want to use the two wolves example that's played out, but picture the battle that's going on. The battle between my flesh wants to do this and the Spirit saying, there's a better thing away. There's health awaiting for you. And for wherever you are in life, whoever you are, this looks a little bit different. But like Paul talks about here, when you boast in the weaknesses, when you say that I have made the flesh weak, when I could have done this thing, but I didn't because I know how it affects my spirit. When I could have said that, and I was righteous in saying it, or I was right in saying it, that you didn't. That this may be okay for somebody else, but I don't think that I want to risk losing the spiritual health battle that's going on. And as we kick off this year, we talk about these things and they're kind of out there, right? This is very vague. Some of you are like, man, land the plane because I'm not following you yet. There are ways that you can strategically strengthen your spirit and weaken the flesh. And I'm going to give you just a few little examples as we get into this, but I'm going to go to Matthew chapter 4 and read a passage that you've probably heard about before. We actually just read this on Wednesday night, plug for our Wednesday night Bible study. But even God, even the Son of Man, was strategic about what I'm talking to you about tonight. Today. Read this. Matthew chapter 4. It says this. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. So backing up, chapter 3, John the Baptist shows up, wild man, camel hair and locusts, baptizing people in the river. And Jesus shows up and he says, that's the guy. I'm not worthy to carry his shoes, that kind of thing. I'm paraphrasing. And Jesus shows up and says, baptize me. And he doesn't know what to do. He's like, me baptize you? And it's hard to understand. Why does Jesus need to be baptized? We talked about this on Wednesday. Right after this moment, the dove, this is my son in whom I'm well pleased. This kicks off Jesus' ministry. Immediately following this moment, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. And here's the purpose, to be tempted by the devil. And then in verse 2, maybe you've read this and thought, well, that's weird. Or maybe you've read it and kind of put things out of order. In my mind, as we read these, this is the way that it happened. I think in our minds, we read this passage where Jesus is tempted by the devil, and it's like the devil strategically goes after Jesus after he's in this weakened state. He's been fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. I think it's exactly the opposite. This is me speculating. Don't take this as something it's not. Let me read again. He was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. This is his call to go do battle. And then he fasted for 40 days. That's a weird response. If the Spirit came to me and said, you're going to go battle the devil and be tempted by the devil in the wilderness, there's a lot of things I would choose to do. But be hangry, let me put it in the words that I can relate to, is not one of them. And I'm speculating again. I think that Jesus did this strategically because he knew what Paul knew. That when I am weak physically, I am strong in the Spirit. We forget this. Jesus was what? We know he's all God. He's part of the Trinity. But he's also like us. Born to a woman. Bled. Felt pain. Stood in line at the DMV. Paid tax. No, not really. He went through all the things that we did. He felt the same emotion and had all the stuff in his face like we do. And his response in this moment, your ministry is kicking off, you're going to go battle Satan. His response to that was to strategically weaken the flesh through fasting. And by the way, how many of you in here have done any sort of fasting? When you do fasting, and when I say that, some are like, well, I'm fasting, diet soda or something. I'm not talking about that or the Daniel fast. I'm not making light of that. I'm just saying, when you give up food and you just consume water for more than about a day, something happens. And if you've not done this is my sort of, I'm open to raise your curiosity just to try it out. Medically, stuff happens too. But there's something that happens to your body when you make a decision to physically weaken the flesh. You're not hurting yourself. In fact, there's a lot of good benefits that come with fasting. He strategically said, I'm going to become weak so that I am. Are you getting it now? When the Apostle Paul talks about boasting of the weakness and recounting all the things that people would say, well, why did that happen? If you're really called of God, why have you been beaten by the Romans? Why have the Jews beat you 4 times? Why have you been stoned? People that are, that's not, if God loved you, well, who do you think you are? And I say all this to hopefully connect some dots in your brains that, like Moses with his speech impediment and his stutter, or whoever the Bible character is, they all had weakness that made it easier, listen to me, for God to use them to do great things. That the thing that you're so like, man, I wish that I didn't have that problem. I wish that I was, whatever. Wish I was a little bit taller. Sorry. Whatever the thing is in your life, you can boast in that weakness if you allow God to use it to strengthen your spirit. That's what I'm trying to say. And the Apostle Paul knew this. Jesus Christ himself, I would speculate, knew this. But it kind of is just off our radar. And in fact, we tend to try to do this Christianity thing out of a position of our own strength. And that's why it doesn't work so well. My dad, who's also a PK, I'm a pastor's kid, most of you know that. He told me a story, and it'll stick with me. It'll always stick with me. But he talks about, going through church and growing up and giving his heart to Jesus, getting baptized, doing all the church stuff you're supposed to do, and then just falling away from God. And the reason that he did is he just gave up. Like he would say that it's not in the cards for me. I don't have it. I can't do it. I can't do this. That he actually said that he prayed to God and said, I'll try one more time, but I can't do it. And he felt like God kind of said, good. You finally get it. And something in that moment just opened his eyes to the whole dynamic, that it's not your self-willed moralism that's going to make you more spiritually strong. It's acknowledging the fleshly weakness and saying, I'm going to deny that. And every day, boy, this is the hard thing about this. There's no checking of a box that just says, I made a decision today. I'm saved. There's no more to do. Your salvation, it's not weak, right? But daily, Scripture talks about, we must crucify the flesh daily. That's what he's talking about. And the way to be spiritually healthy, maybe 2026 is a year that you can lean into a new level of health like never before. And maybe what it is for you is just realizing that you are part of a battle that's going on daily. Whether you're choosing, am I going to do things in my own strength? Am I going to boast in my weakness? And as strange as that is, there's no better place of health than knowing that. And for some people, it may be realizing that the biggest problem in your life that you keep asking God to take away, that he's put in there to make sure that you have to rely on him. I think that was Paul's dynamic. Type number 1, Lord, take this demon away from me, or this eyesight problem. I don't know what it was. Again, my grace is sufficient for you, Paul the apostle. Lord, I know I talked to you about this, but that diagnosis that I got from the doctor, that my grace is, I'm not saying this is how it is, but sometimes God uses those things, whether he put it in place or not, to make you spiritually strong. It's so weird. I know some of you don't like this. Some of you are kind of like, that's not what I've heard. Paul says it. I don't think God has a problem with you continuing to show up and say, take this thing away from me. But he may be trying to use that very thing you want him to lift, to take away, to put you in a place of spiritual health. I don't know what that looks like for you. I know that's a convoluted thing. It's not, there's nothing in here that's like 90 seconds of like a sound bite that's really going to just change your life. But you have to understand that physical weakness, the weakness of your flesh, is what has to happen if you want to be spiritually strong and spiritually healthy. When I am weak, I am strong.